Hello, this is Lisa, your host of Unexplained America, and thank you so much for joining me this week. Now, this is part 2 of the Green River Killer. So if you have not listened to part 1, please stop, go back, listen to part 1, and let me know what you think. Now, a little bit of business, just a big shout out to new Patreon member, Jennifer W. So thank you so much for joining the Patreon. If you wish to join the Patreon, just go to the show notes, click Patreon. You get so much extra bonus content, and more is coming for the Patreon in the next week. Stay tuned and join the Patreon. Now, if you wish to connect with me, unexplainedamerica2@gmail.com is the best way, and you can go to unexplainedamerica.com. Go to the website. Please follow me. I have a new Facebook page. I do have a group on Facebook, so if you're already in the group, that's great, but please go over, follow me on the page as well. That'd be great. And then I am on TikTok, Instagram. Please feel free to reach out to me if you have any content requests or just any spooky stories to tell me. I would love it. We're going to get started. Again, listener discretion on this. This is a heinous case. This is a serious case. Obviously, all the true crime cases that I cover are, but definitely listener discretion for heinous and bizarre material and content in this episode. Okay. Now, where we left off in part 1, it was April of 1987, and the Green River Task Force had just searched Gary Ridgway's home, car. They had searched his locker. They were really hoping to find some type of materials to connect him with the missing women. During this situation, they do take, they weren't able to get a blood sample. Warrant did not allow for a blood sample to be taken. They did take saliva. Saliva was allowed. And at that time, one of the big things they were looking at was they could get your blood type from saliva if you were a so-called secretor. Like some people secrete, some people don't. It was just one of those things that everybody was different. The judge did not allow for blood to be taken, but hair was taken from Gary Ridgway, from his head and pubic hair, and a piece of gauze to put his saliva on. So they had these items, and they actually, at that time and close to it, there was some early testing, extractions going on. This is just very early quote-unquote DNA sampling going on. So they did send some of these materials to a lab out in New York at that time. Nothing came of that at that time. And then, of course, when they searched, they didn't come up with anything that was going to tie in Gary to these victims, particularly what they were looking for with hair, fibers, to tie in. Goodness, if they could have found something like jewelry or clothing items or any type of, driver's license of these women. So anything that could tie Gary to these women is what they were looking for. And at that time, they really didn't know that Gary had just replaced his carpeting. So the carpeting in his home was brand new carpeting, by the way. After this search happens, of course, the team is frustrated and that they didn't find what they were looking for. In June of 1987, a skeleton is found near a Green River Community College. This skeleton comes back as a Cindy Smith. She was 17 years old. She had been missing since 1984. In September of 87, a woman is found wrapped in plastic, which was similar to plastic left at other victim sites. Okay, so this was another. And this victim would be identified as a Rosemarie Curran, and she had only been missing for a couple of weeks. Unfortunately, Rose had been one of the sex workers Detective Dave Reichert had actually spoken to in the past about being safe out there and getting off the streets. So now at this same time, the Seattle Times issued out a series of articles that were surrounding the victims and the Green River killings. And the task force, of course, was glad for this attention. Any press attention was good on the case to further get in front of the public, the articles were also critiquing, and just the kind of the big headlines were Green River, what went wrong, and specifically honed in on the investigation, valuable time lost, and ignored possibilities and investigation gaps. So it was outlining just a lot of things that the Green River Task Force, quote unquote, wasn't doing. Of course, they didn't realize all the man hours and everything that was going on behind the scenes. Now, at this same time in early 1988, there were some changes in the sheriff's office. The sheriff resigned. There was just a lot of political pushing. A new sheriff was appointed. And at this time, so King County didn't, quote unquote, elect their sheriffs. They were appointed by higher up officials. Okay. But so it was a very political situation and appointments and such. This new sheriff came in and the task force budget was decreased and kind of changed up a little bit. And this was like at the beginning of 88. Now, in May of 1988, Debbie Estes remains were found. It was found when a construction crew were putting in a playground on Federal Way. Upon recovery, pieces of cloth were recovered. And then they also noted that specks of the microscopic paint particles, which seen in other victims, were the same. Now, Debbie had been missing since September of 1982, and Debbie was literally only 15 years old. She had been on the streets kind of off and on since she was 12, and her parents were Tom and Carol, so they had been working with Dave and the sheriff's Green River Task Force the entire time, and they had last seen her July of 82, and at that time she was going by different aliases, but one of which was a Betty Jones. Now, obviously, Tom and Carol Estes were heartbroken. I'm sure they were holding out a lot of hope that they would find Debbie. They had kind of understood the situation, and they were very connected to Dave Reichert, and they actually asked Dave to be the pallbearer at Debbie's funeral. On top of investigating, Dave and the team are really looking at doing anything they can to keep the Green River killer case again in front of the publics. Now, Dave and Myrtie Winston, and now Myrtie was the mother of Tracy Ann Winston. She was a 19-year-old, and she had been found dead in the Green River in March of 86. Myrtie was very outspoken. She was one of the most outspoken Green River victims' parents. And so her and Dave went on the talk show Sally Jesse Raphael. I don't know if you guys remember that. I do. She had those red framed glasses. They go on. They're just trying to get leads. It just any press coverage was going to be good. So they do go to New York City. They're glad to go and get press coverage, but it was a very not fun experience. And Dave himself discussed how he told Sally Jesse Raphael that he would never again go on her show, which I don't know how much longer her show ran. I'll have to look that up. That is interesting. It ran for until 2002. That's very interesting. After the Sally Jesse Raphael show, Dave does get approached from a producer from a Manhunt Live show. The Manhunt Live, they offer $100,000 reward, and this is going to be like a live show, and they're going to post a phone number during the show for the audience to call if they have any tips, leads, or whatever. So this is a huge deal. And Patrick Duffy is going to narrate the program. It's going to be a nationwide, like everywhere live show. And during the program, they did have several mothers and family members discussing things about the victims. Like they really wanted to obviously humanize the victims and promote getting the help of the public, but they showed pictures of the victims as little girls and teenagers, showed how innocent and vulnerable and young these victims were. Of course, a lot of these victims were children. Marie Bellows' mother, she shows pictures of her daughter, and she discusses how free-spirited she was, very lovable. She always told me, don't worry, I can handle it. Fortunately, she couldn't handle it. Marie's body was found off of Highway 410 on October 12th of 1984. Again, the producers are showing pictures of all of the victims. There's the Kimmy Pister at age 16, just how adorable she was, and they discuss how she was this little girl. She was everybody's sweetheart. She was just sweet and beautiful child, loved to dance. On the program, as well as having the families, if they have Dave, he's actually going to wrap up the program, but they also have the FBI profiler, the special agent John Douglas, on. He's discussing the profile. He's discussing how this killer is very sane, very intelligent individual who knew right from wrong, that the killer had likely been abused or neglected as a child, and discussed how in the late 20s, this man would be going on a hunt. He was manipulative, dominating, and he would humiliate his victims. And then he also discussed how the killer would be obsessed with the actual investigation itself. Now, the program, like I said, it does close out with Dave Reichert talking directly to the audience and just asking them to call in with any tips and leads. Well, this program produces over 10,000 tips. So, and then they have a whole nother suspect come alive. So we've already discussed, of course, you had the Melvin Foster in part 1. You had the Bill McLean and, of course, Gary Ridgway. So in these tips, a suspect named William Stevens. Now, much about this William Stevens fit the profile of the Green River Killer. He had been a military police officer. He was very smart. He was had earned a doctorate in psychology. He also had a home, and his family had a home in Oregon. So this was very close to where 2 of the Green River bodies had been found. So he was going kind of back and forth. He was in Spokane, Washington, and then also in Oregon. They were actually able to get an arrest on William just for an old warrant. And when they searched his home, they did find a lot of guns, a large amount of pornography, a lot of surplus police gear. Now, William's pretty much lawyered up, so they never spoke directly to him. But when they looked deeper at him, they were able to get a lot of information and actual documentation to show that he would have, to show that he wasn't able to do some of the murders. So his family actually helped that out. So in the end, William Stevens was clear, but his name had gotten leaked to the press, and so millions of people were told that he was a serial killer. So he stated to the press that he hoped to publish his own book written from the perspective of someone who was briefly made infamous by a brush with the Green River case. I can't see that he ever did write his book, but it looked like in the 90s, people were still very much thinking William was the culprit, and it looks like his brother mentioned writing a book about him being the culprit. So that was interesting because the same brother was the one that did tell the police of certain incidences that were backed up as far as William not being able to be at certain locations to the murder. It's very interesting. Now, by the end of 1988, the Green River Task Force and the whole team at the King County, so they're looking at the case and they're looking at everything, and $15 million had been spent by this time on the Green River case. There had been 9,500 items logged into evidence and 37,000 tips pursued. Obviously, the personal cost to these detectives was huge. There were psychological costs, marriages. This was a team that had 0 arrests, so there was never anything to really finalize for the team. These detectives were constantly working without any type of reward here as far as like an arrest or anything good happening. So morale was low. Now, a lot of the detectives just left on their own accord. Faye Brooks herself, she goes back to the sex crimes and she does become a patrol sergeant very quickly. So a lot of these people are rerouting now, even though they're transferring out of the Green River Task Force, they are still taking all of the information with them. So Faye in her work is constantly looking, they're still looking at, of course, the past suspects, and specifically Gary Ridgway. He's always on their mind. Now, fast forward to the fall of 1989, and an Andrea Childers, she was a 19-year-old. She had been missing since the spring of 1983. Andrea's body was found close to the Strip in the same general area that Giselle Lavorne was found, Constance Naone, a Kelly Ware, and the Mary Meehan. At the crime scene, they marked off the area around the body. They looked for anything buried, combed for any type of evidence. They were using garden tools, scrapers, carefully pushing aside any type of dirt. By this time in 89, there were still 8 missing women on a list of possible victims. In the coming years, the sheriff's department would find 4 more bodies. And as much as it pained Dave Reichert, he was also going to move on. The Green River Task Force was dissipating, and only one person was going to be left to man the computers, which was Detective Tom Jensen that we mentioned before. So April 1st of 1990 was Dave's last day with the Green River Task Force. Now, he is promoted quickly to sergeant, and just like Faye, just like the other officers that were dispersed to other departments, he is still very much working the case, but just as a different facilitator. So as sergeant, he is head of a team. He was still working in charge of the county area around the Green River and the Strip. So he was constantly looking and telling his people to be on the lookout for certain things and keep the women that were working the Strip at that time safe, like trying to. Between 1990 and 1996, Dave and Faye quickly rose through the ranks of the King County. Faye became the first woman to make lieutenant, and she actually made lieutenant ahead of Dave. Dave would be behind her making lieutenant, and then he eventually made major again by 1996. So there were some changes that were coming about in King County. So the people had, I guess, pressured the government at that time so that they could actually vote for a sheriff. They no longer wanted an appointed sheriff. Now, Dave really did not have it on his radar at all for running for sheriff. That just wasn't something that he was looking to do at that time, but others within the organization, within the department, talked to him. They actually went ahead and appointed him to the sheriff before the election happened. And when he actually ran for sheriff, he received 77% of the voters' approval. This was key, especially for the Green River killers' families, victims' families. They were, wanting to promote Dave. They felt like he would, get the job done, and he had so much experience for all of his years in the department. So now, as of 1996, Dave Reichert is the sheriff of King County. During this time, unfortunately, there was almost zero press coverage of the Green River killers during the 90s. And as far as, of course, the King County, that was very much still in their minds. It was very much still in the minds of the families, especially the families that were still looking for their daughter. So there was still a lot of missing women. Now, by early 2001, it really hit home to the whole department when the History Channel actually aired a documentary on the Green River Killer. And in their opinions, of course, this is hitting to us. I don't think we think too, in this day and time, we don't think too closely about the History Channel as far as like the word history. But at that time, that really hurt. It was like, okay, yeah, that this killer in the history, this is in the background. At this time, on top of all of this, a good thing was going on in labs across America. So a huge advancement in DNA technologies. By 2001, Washington State Laboratory, they had the equipment for extracting and testing DNA samples. So in very tiny samples. Before, like they had done, like I mentioned, they had done some testing at the late 80s or whatever to try to extract like blood and such from different samples. Nothing was really working. They needed a lot of samples to be able to extract any information, and it was just very difficult, and the technology just wasn't there. By 2001, they are up and running. Dave, he connects with Detective Tom Jensen. Tom Jensen is still working the Green River case. Okay, he is kind of in charge of the case, in charge of the computer system with all the tips and leads. Dave talks to Tom about getting the DNA samples, like all of the evidence. There should be enough evidence collected, especially specifically from Marcia Chapman's body and then Opal Mills' body, because they actually had semen found on their bodies when they were extracted from the Green River. They begin testing, okay? So they have hair, they have fibers, they do have those flecks of paint from Debbie Estes' grave where she was dumped. So they do have this. By September, this literally September 10th, 2001. This is the day before 9/11, guys. Oh, I can't even imagine. Tom Jensen, he calls to set up a meeting with Dave. And at this meeting, and Dave goes ahead and has Faye, be at the meeting along with them. Now, Tom brings in a DNA profile that was taken from Marcia Chapman, and then they had a profile taken from Opal Mills, and they were identical profiles. So this killer was one person. So that kind of affirmed for them that this was one person. He's showing Dave and Faye this information. He's saying, okay, this DNA is from one, and it is matching one of the suspects. And before Tom can even tell them who it is, David literally says, it's Gary, isn't it? Like, he knew it. And immediately Tom, Dave, Faye, like, this is just an explosion of relief, tears. Finally, they have the evidence. Like, they have the actual evidence to definitively say it was Gary Ridgway, which of course they were feeling like he was definitely involved for a long time, for a very long time. So this was just huge relief. This is September 10th of 01. Of course, the very next day, the world just is rocked and the world changes here in America, and they can't rush out to arrest Gary. They have to have, obviously, this is hugely significant. His semen is found in these women, and this is definitively tying him to those three victims on the Green River on August 15th of 1982. Again, still cannot rush out and get him. They quietly, because they're having, this is huge news. So Dave quietly assembles some of the people that worked closely on the Green River Task Force to start investigating and putting together an actual file for prosecution. Okay. And they knew that whenever they did arrest Gary, this would be national news, international news. This would be huge. They really wanted everything to be, all the I's to be dotted, the T's to be crossed. This was a very big deal. So they are assembling and they are working on this arrest. So the first thing they do pull the file on Opal and Marcia, and they immediately start surveilling Gary. So they are watching him. And they also are tracking down any and all old witnesses from before to find out who was available, who was alive. They are getting ready. Now, at this time, they knew of 48 known victims, but they had no clue how many more were there. While they're investigating, while they're surveying Gary, they are continuing to work in the lab, and they do process evidence on Carol Christensen's body, and this also confirms that Gary's DNA was on Carol. So he definitely, at this point, is connected to the three women on August 15th and then Carol Christensen's body, which, remember, she was the one was found, and her body was staged. She was actually dressed. She had a bag over her head, sausage on her hands, a wine bottle. It was just very, very odd situation. Now, obviously, the sheriff's office is working closely with the prosecution office, and they have a senior deputy prosecutor, Jeff Baird, and he is working with a colleague, Patricia Eakes. Now, they are, of course, the prosecutors have to put together the arrest warrants and everything else, and so they tell the task force that they'll be ready for the arrest on December 7th of 2001. So again, they confirm on September 10th of 01, and they're going to be ready for the arrest in December 7th. Now, like we discussed, Gary is they're watching him. Now, on November 15th, he doesn't come home from work. They're kind of watching his patterns. He works. He typically gets off work around 3 p.m. and he doesn't come home. And in fact, they kind of lost him on that evening. They don't find him. And then they do see that he returns home with his wife after midnight on the 15th. So really into the 16th. They go back, try to figure out what went on. Well, what was actually going on, and they find this out about a couple days later, that he had been arrested for prostitution on the 15th. So now the task force is very upset. They're like, oh no, he is trolling, he is working, he could get another victim. This worries them, and they're like, we have to speed up the arrest. So the prosecution, they go to the prosecution and they're like, we have to speed this up. They decide to set up the arrest on Friday, November 30th, 2001. Dave, as much as he wanted to be a part of the arrest, he could not. He is sheriff. So he is back at the command post, ready to kind of talk to the press once Gary is arrested. And now Dave does go talk to the lady patrol officer that had arrested Gary. So on that day, on the 30th, he kind of gives her a heads up. He says that the man that you arrested, the Gary Ridgway, on November 15th, is about to be arrested today as the Green River Killer. Like, she had no idea. She was absolutely shocked. So she had actually been, undercover vice cop. She was absolutely shocked. What they do is they send unmarked cars to the Kenworth truck plant that Gary works at, and they send the cars over around 11. Now, officers Sue Peters and John Matson, they're going to work it. Now, Sue Peters, if you'll remember, she was the officer that worked the scene with Dave on that August 15th of 1982. So she is involved. They send her over. So Sue and John tell Gary that they are there that day as sex crime detectives, and they're investigating the rape of Carol Christensen. At first, Gary is reluctant to talk to them. Sue and John just act very nonchalant. They're trying to seek his help. They're trying to warm him up a little bit. So they're just asking him to look at photos. He says he did recognize Christensen's picture, that he had never had sexual relationship with her. And of course, the officers know that this is a lie because his DNA was found inside of her. Sue and John, they show photos of Christensen's body, how it had been left, the fish, the meat, the wine, like all of it. And the whole time, Ridgway is acting just very helpful. He's pretending to kind of guess the meaning behind this staging or whatever. So the detectives kind of thank him. They leave. So this was like around 11 on the Friday. He doesn't realize it, but he's going to finish his shift. And then as soon as he finishes, he's going to be arrested. Detectives Jim Dayon and Randy Mullinex, they actually are in a silver Chevy Suburban. They are just waiting there with other officers, unmarked vehicles on the down low, and they're waiting at the Kenworth employee exit at 3 p.m., waiting for Gary to finish work and step out. And as soon as Gary does step outside of the Kenworth building, pull up, they get him, they tell him that they're detectives with the King County Sheriff's Office and that he's under arrest for the murder of several women in King County. And all he says is, okay. Now, they're just trying to get Gary moving as quickly as possible. So they didn't even pat him down, put him in the handcuffs, nothing. They just get him in the car. So they immediately take him to the Kent Regional Justice Center. Dave had already set up a press conference for that day at 4:30 p.m. They had already told the press to be aware and that there were big news that they wouldn't want to miss. Okay, so they kind of gave them a heads up, at least to that. At the press conference, Dave greets the crowd. There was a huge crowd that had gotten together. He is having to control his voice, control his emotions, because this is such a monumental event for him that he had been working towards for 20 years. But he does announce Today at approximately 3 p.m., detectives from the King County Sheriff's Office arrested a 52-year-old man for investigation of homicide. Detectives have probable cause to believe he is responsible for the deaths of 4 women. The women killed are Opal Mills, Marcia Chapman, and Cynthia Hines, all of whom were found in the Green River on August 15th of 1982. In addition, we believe that he is responsible for the death of Carol Christensen, whose body was found on May 8th, 1983, in the woods near Southeast 242nd Street and 248th Street Southeast in Maple Valley. The man arrested is Gary Leon Ridgway. In this speech, this is just Dave goes in to congratulate the team, the DNA evidence, of course, the scientists that worked on it with the state lab. The room, it was the excitement, the relief was palpable. There were many of the reporters that had followed the Green River case from the beginning, and so they kind of knew, and they even stated this was just a huge relief to get to this day. As far as Gary was concerned, so they arrest him. He is taken into custody. He's pretty passive, almost completely uninterested in his own fate. He doesn't ask any questions on the ride there. He didn't ask for an attorney. He didn't ask to call his wife or son. The only thing that he had said on the way to the Justice Center, like upon getting arrested, was, "What's going to happen to my truck?" And all they were like, "Okay, it's yeah. Your truck is safe. Your truck is going to be poured over and dismantled." But yeah, that was his only concern. They read him his rights, and he didn't immediately, again, he still hadn't asked for an attorney. Randy and Jim do continue to talk to him. Tom Jensen is kind of watching through a two-way mirror. They do have a transcriber there who's writing down everything that was said at this point. And so they talk to Gary for about an hour. They're just talking. They're showing him information from the binder, evidence amassed against him, just everything from time reports from his job, credit card receipts, bank records, surveillance reports, like everything. And he's just looking over everything, very intrigued, okay, he's flipping through the pages. He does intently, they feel like, stare at the Marie Malvar case and then Carol Christensen. So he's looking deeply at that information. And again, about an hour in, he finally asks for an attorney. Yeah, I don't know an attorney, but he knew of a name of an attorney that his family had used. And so they give him a phone book. And if the conversation, the interview is over, they don't talk to him anymore about the case. That was his demeanor. It was just very, "Where have you guys been?" type of situation. At this point, we're going to go and we're going to look deeply at Gary. Now, I'm not going to be crazy, but I did enjoy a good dive into his ancestry. So we're going to focus on Gary, his family, his growing up, and so forth. Now, Gary Leon Ridgway is born on a Friday. It's February 18th of 1949. I think that's interesting because he's arrested on a Friday. He is born to Thomas Newton Ridgway Jr. and then Mary, and he goes by Tommy, and then Mary Rita Steinman Ridgway. On Mary's side, now her family, her background, like her parents were the first born in the United States. Mary's dad's side had immigrated from Germany before 1896, and then her mother's side of the family had immigrated from Hungary right before 1892. They had their children in the United States. On Gary's dad's side, the Ridgways, from what I could see and go as far back, so they had been in the United States for a long time. We're talking back to the 1700s at minimum, even longer. But it is interesting, Gary's great-great-grandfather, his name was Benjamin. Ridgway was spelled literally Ridgway, like with an E. But after Benjamin, the E drops and the E is no longer there. His son, his son's son, and on down the roads. I thought that was a little bit interesting. Just something changed in the wording, just that little letter in the name. Gary's parents had been born, like his mother was born in North Dakota, his dad in New Mexico, in his dad's family. But his parents meet and settle in 1947 in Utah. And this is where Gary is born. Now, they do have one son literally right before they have Gary. So in 1948, so they get married in 47. They have their first son, Gregory, in 1948. And then they have Gary in 49. And then a couple of years later, they do have a third and final son, Thomas. So they have 3 boys, and Gary is right there in the middle. They are in Utah until Gary is about 11. And then they move to Washington State, settle in that Kent area where Gary will live for the remainder of his life. Now, in his early years, it said that his mother was strict, a little domineering. His father was laid back. His parents seemed to get along, but his mother would sometimes be explosive. One incident said that she literally slapped his father across the face one time, at the table for just nothing, for no reason. I guess she was explosive. Gary, growing up, he was shy, quiet. He evidently wet the bed, and his mother was a clean freak. And that was something that was described about Gary as well. He would be a clean freak, considered that. But his mother, clean freak, evidently she was very angry with his bedwetting, and according to him would get him out of bed, throw him in the bath, just be very upset about the situation and hard on him, and evidently would wash him. And he explained that it was terrifying, but also arousing for him. So there was just this very mixed up situation to where he was terrified of his mother. He loved his mother, but then he kind of was sexually attracted to his mother on one level. So during this growing up, because evidently this was something not just when he was little, but evidently he wet his bed for a long time. So this was perpetual as he's growing up. And evidently he was very close to his older brother Greg, who was very protective of Gary and very just there for him in these times of difficulties with the mom or whatever. So, but Mary was described as just very strict, a clean freak, and somewhat quote unquote abusive. There was never any mention of beatings or hitting, but I'm sure, and this is a different time and place, I'm sure there were spankings or whatever going on. So, but it was just very evidently confusing for Gary his whole life as far as how he looked at his mother. Loved, loathed. Growing up, he also, so school-wise, he had a tough time as well. And that was another area where Greg would help Gary out, because evidently Greg was athlete and very bright or whatever, and that was something like Gary had dyslexia, and so, and I'm sure at that time, I don't know if it was diagnosed or anything like that, but he had a tough time in school, and this was another area where he was belittled or made to feel inferior by his parents and by his mother specifically. That was an issue growing up. So again, they move to Washington. He finishes school or whatever. So it does say that he finishes school. Some reports say that he's in school until he's 20, which other reports say that he has already entered into the U.S. Navy by the time he's 19. And it looks like he's following kind of in the steps of his brother and even just a family. It looks like the family history was to go into the military branches. And so Gary does enter the U.S. Navy at the age 19. And then kind of right at this same time, he actually had met a girl named Claudia Craig. Now, they get married. So this is literally August of 1970. So kind of around the same time. He's in the Navy. He is married to Claudia. And this marriage is very short-lived. So Gary, he doesn't see action as far as the Vietnam War, as far as being in war, but he is sent overseas, and he is sent to the Philippines for a time, for a stint there. And he does, during this time, evidently his marriage is not good with Claudia. She's back home. Evidently she's kind of doing her thing, kind of dating around. And then when he's in the Philippines, he gets involved with prostitutes there. And during this time, he is engaging with sex workers, and he gets gonorrhea and chlamydia. And this is and he is very young, newly married. Again, the marriage not going well, and the other soldiers with him are seeing this behavior or whatever, and it's kind of common knowledge that his marriage is not going well. He does come back. He gets out of service. Him and Claudia actually divorce. Their divorce is final by January 14th of 1972. So he and Claudia are not even married 2 years, and then they're divorced, and the basis is cruelty. But it was a mutual situation as far as cheating and so forth. Now he is back in Washington. He gets a job at the Kenworth trucking manufacturing plant. And basically this plant, like we kind of mentioned and touched on before, like he is in charge of painting these trucks. And he is said to be very meticulous, like very meticulous. And he's also mentioned to relationship with his mother, but he is said to rely on her greatly. Like she is evidently on all of his bank accounts. He evidently or allegedly took his payroll stubs to her. Like he didn't make any decisions without his mother. Now, also, of course, because of that whole situation in the Philippines, and then more so growing up, like his dad was said when they were living in Washington, his dad was a bus driver, and evidently he would drive that section of the strip that we mentioned, and he would just constantly complain about the sex workers, like complain about them. So this was in Gary's head, but then also when he's in the Philippines, he blames the sex workers for his getting gonorrhea and chlamydia. Yes, he blames them. It's their fault. So anyway, so he has this twisted up situation with his mother, and then also with sex workers. It's like they're bad and evil, but yet he is a client. He is entrapped or whatever in his own mind. They're trapping him and whatnot. So he has this hatred for sex workers building and such. So like we mentioned, so January of 72, he is divorced. By December of 1973, he does get married to his second wife, and she is Marcia Lorraine Brown. During this time, it is said that Gary kind of goes through a religious period, or trying to be very religious and very, reading his Bible, going to church, trying to follow this preaching. Now, it's also said that he has kind of a sex addiction. Marcia will explain later that he not only has choked her, but he's very controlling. He's still going to his mother for everything. So that's a problem in their marriage, the controlling. He has a temper. So if they get into a fight, he was known to choke her. They do have a child. They have a little boy in 1975. And during this time, from what they know, he is not murdering anyone during this time. He is going out on the strip. He is dipping into the sex worker scene, okay? Although he's fighting against that with his whole religious thing, but he is trying to be religious. He's also on the flip side not being a great husband to Marcia in the situation that assaulted, and then he is also just requiring sex from her multiple times a day. Nothing's ever enough for Gary. And he is still working. That is something interesting. As far as the profiling goes, I think it's interesting that the profile did fit Gary, except for the profile said that he would have a tough time keeping a job. He had his job for over 30 years, and he was consistently working and doing a good job and whatever. So that was interesting to me. Marcia finally has enough of Gary. I mean, again, they got married in 73, and by May of 1981, their divorce goes through. So she is tired of it. She is done with it. They do have a shared custody of their son, and I will say, we'll talk about that, but it's more like Gary is seeing his son every other weekend, kind of like that kind of split. And of course, his son would only be about six years old or so very, very young. This situation was extremely hurtful to Gary. He was seriously mad. He loved Marcia. He loved having, I guess, a wife and controlling her. He didn't see any issues with this. And so when she left him, when she had enough, when the divorce went through, he was very angry at Marcia. And so this kicks off, of course, this is 81. This kicks off his beginning to, like, he's already doing the prostitution thing, but now he's taking his anger out on the women, and this is going to quickly spiral into him killing the women. And he himself will say he was angry, and then he was angry at Marcia, he was angry at them, getting behind the women. He wanted to be able to choke them after sex, and sometimes it wasn't even about the sex. Like, it was just about controlling and powering over them, and then finally, like, just ending their life. So this was where he spiraled and began actually murdering the women after his divorce from Marcia. This period, I mean, he will describe, he has a house, he has a job, he's very seen as meek on the job. They kind of quiet and nice. People don't really think much of him. They say he really tries really hard to come off like nice and normal, but he's a little odd. But he's just Gary, like, he's unassuming. He himself, when he goes out on the strip, like, he drives this older pickup truck. He has toys in his car from his son. I think there was one instance where his son was very young, but he literally had his son and picked up a woman, and he would actually bring these sex workers to his home and would kill them in the home. And in fact, that whole situation with Marie Malvar, where the Des Moines police department comes to his house in 1983, well, literally Marie was still in the house, and the police officer was actually an officer that Gary had gone to school with. So he had gone to school with the guy. He's like, hey, Gary, we got this complaint, we just need to check it out. And of course they know each other. Gary's just extremely unassuming, and he's just flying under that radar. But he says that he literally kills maybe 20 to 30 women inside his home there. It's just absolutely insane to think about. So between this period, the 82 to 85, he is doing most of his murdering. He does meet a woman named Judith. They begin dating. She moves into his house, and he falls like madly in love with her. Like, they are so together. I mean, she will express this, neighbors, people that knew them, like, they were very much together. He loved her. He did everything for her. He was very sweet to her. She was sweet to him. Like, he finally met a woman, because obviously he has these mommy issues and women issues and very mixed feelings, but Judith was different. He loved her. She treated him well. He treated her well. They were extremely together, and they get married in 1985, and they will remain married until he is arrested, and we'll talk about that. But yeah, so during this time, he's getting married, things taper off for him. So he is working, he has Judith, he is happy, he's in love. It's tapered. And she even says the only good thing about finding out that you were married to a serial killer is that during this time she probably curbed him from a lot of his, she saved some lives just by being with him during this period. But he wasn't completely done. He was still trolling. He was still on the strip. It did curb his appetite quite a bit, probably for several years, but he was still active, and we'll kind of talk about that. And obviously we know he was, because he was active in 2001 when he was getting picked up by the undercover cop, the vice cop. So anyway, so it did curb quite a bit. And again, he loved her. Now, he also talks, and she is literally living, when they first get together, she moves in and lives in this home where he has killed 20 to 30 women. And he does discuss later that when he is in his bedroom, he would literally have like images or spirits, like he was being haunted by some of these women that he killed there. And that was like something that really freaked him out, frightened him. And again, he does stop killing in certain periods. But yeah, he is literally getting haunted by the things that he's done to these young, innocent women. It's just insane. But she is in the bedroom. She is in the bedroom. She has no idea that she is living and sleeping and being with him in this place where he has killed so many women. This goes on until, like I said, until he's caught. So he's working, he's with Judith, he's still hunting, he's still out there. And then finally in 2001, he is arrested. Now it does look like, and we'll kind of go a little bit backwards, but he is arrested at the end of 2001 in November. And then it looks like he actually files, like, I think she separates him. I mean, she is devastated, by the way. She truly loved him. She is devastated. She, will give interviews and discuss and such, but absolute devastation on her part. And just can't believe he did that to her, like, how in the world did you do this to me? Like, you knew I loved you so much, but just completely blindsided her. And it looks like he actually files for divorce, and their divorce is finalized, while he's in prison in April of 2003. So, yes, but it's interesting to me, and I've covered, if you've listened to the Richard Ramirez, and then I had covered Ed Gein and certain people for the Patreon and looking at a lot of these serial killers, and I'm by no means a psychologist by any means or stretch of the imagination, but it is interesting. So Gary's a crier. He's a crybaby when discussing, and you can't tell if he's actually crying about what he did. I don't know, but he does cry. Things get to him. Unlike Richard Ramirez, who laughed. Richard Ramirez would literally laugh when the families discussed what he did to their daughters, their mothers, he would just laugh. He had felt nothing, like absolutely nothing. The only people that he ever felt for was literally his mother and his sister, his own mother and sister. Those were the only people that he seemed to care about, but he was not a crier. But Gary's a crybaby, and he's, it is interesting that, and Richard didn't have mommy issues. He had daddy issues, but Gary has the mommy issues. Obviously, Ed Gein, Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy wasn't a crier too, because he did not care about what he did. He wouldn't even admit what he did, actually. But if you look at like Brian Kohberger, he had zero emotion when victims' families were talking to him or at him. Zero emotions. But Gary Ridgway, he had emotion. I feel like he was very conflicted by what he was, if that makes sense. Not to say, he's definitely a monster, but it's very interesting to me that there's this combined mommy issue for sure, but he is also conflicted by his religious beliefs, and even when he's arrested, of course, it's very hard. I will say that Dave Reichert discusses his strong faith in God and such, and he does talk to Gary, and Gary actually wants to repent of his sins. And he has that very stricken situation. It's just very interesting. And now Richard Ramirez also had that, because he grew up in a very faithful Catholic home, so he had a conflict with his own religion, but he was definitely not a crybaby. But Gary was a crybaby, and that's just very, very interesting. And it almost seems most of the time that he was crying for himself when he would talk about the things that were done to him and such. But he did shed tears as far as victims' families talking about what he did to the people. And particularly, like, there was Carol Christensen, whom, yes, she I guess she did some sex work, but he knew her, and she was the one that was staged. He knew her, he liked her, and basically she died because she no longer was doing what he wanted her to do, quote unquote. You know what I'm saying? She made him angry and wasn't doing, wasn't pleasing him, wasn't, doing everything that he wanted her to do. So he's just incredibly selfish, which of course all of these killers have that in common. Yeah, I just thought the crybabiness was very, very interesting. We've talked about Gary, so kind of back to the point of arrest. And of course, we discussed that the biggest question for Gary was, what's going to happen to my drug? They do set him up with a public defender after, he had requested an attorney. He flipped through the phone book and couldn't find who he was looking for. And so they do set him up with the public defender. And Gary had actually, the other thing that he was really concerned about as well was the police mentioned how they were going to search his home. So him and Judith had moved into a new home around 97. So around 1997, so to 2001, they lived in a new home, and he had done a lot of landscaping. He's like, I just landscaped that. Are you guys going to tear all that up? Blah, blah. Like, that was his concern. As you can imagine, the bulk of his activity had been at his previous house. So the cops actually went, had to go to his past home. And can you imagine the surprise of the current owners finding out that the man that you bought this house from is a serial killer? He's a Green River killer, and they are going to destroy your home. They still are looking for some sort of something. Like, did he keep, they're thinking he had to have kept some type of jewelry, identification, like some type of quote unquote souvenir from these murders. And so they search and destroy, of course, him and Judith's house, and then his previous home, and then also his parents' home. So they are combing through all three properties, and of course everybody's vehicles and everything, and they really do come up empty. And when I say comb through, they are using backhoes, they are digging, they are not leaving anything to chance. They're worried and concerned that he has hidden bodies, bones, whatever. There's things. So there are backhoes, there are cadaver dogs involved. This is a huge, massive search. And again, Gary, other than being bothered about his truck and his landscaping that he just did, he's just pretty docile, just quiet, unassuming still. He just doesn't look like much of a man, especially as far as like being strong or combative or anything. He just doesn't fit that scenario. As elated as the family members are, there's so much going on. The prosecution and the investigators, they have to put together a case. Defense, and the lead defense attorney is an Anthony Savage. So he is going to plead innocent, like Gary is going to plead innocent. So they're working on a defense, but that side of things, basically the defense attorney is playing the delay game, and hearings upon hearings of just pushing things out, which is what they do. That's what they do. Now, the prosecution side, again, was the Jeff Ballard and the Patricia Eakes, and the whole department, the heads of the prosecution, chief deputy of the office, is talking to the press, and it's very clear that he is going after the death penalties. People are asking, okay, well, what if he pleads guilty? Will this get him out of the death penalty? And at that time, they're like, absolutely not. We will not take anything less than the death penalty. That's what they're putting out there right away. And so this is what the defense is, working towards, trial. They're all working towards a trial. So, and as we talked about, the investigators are investigating. They are getting reports. They are talking to everyone that knows Gary. And again, basically they're talking about how he's quiet, he's neat, he adores Judith, like absolutely adores her. Others are saying he's always grooming. This was interesting. He's always grooming. He's always strutting around like a quote unquote little rooster, just kind of strutting. And then other coworkers, like other people that worked with him, they were like, he was kind of creepy friendly, like over the top friendly. And obviously these people that worked with Gary for a long time, so they were with him during the period in 1987, everyone at the Kenworth knew that Gary Ridgway was being investigated as the Green River Killer. They came into the plant, they searched his locker, they knew. And so from then on, kind of as a joke, like not even as like these people weren't even for real about it, but they literally behind his back called Gary Green River Gary. Okay. That was what he was known as at the plant. And so you have the victims' parents, the victims' families, and the reality is these women were, goodness, some of them were girls, just simply girls, but they were all daughters, some were mothers, they were friends, they were cousins, they were loved, they were people, and they were loved. And so a lot of these families, of course, are like absolutely thrilled, obviously, with the arrest, just to get some type of something going on. And then some were very riding heavy on their faith and actually talking about forgiveness of Gary and forgiving. And then some people were just very gung-ho on wanting the death penalty. For instance, Debbie Estes' family were absolutely death penalty. And we see that in cases today, like the Koberger case. You see that some of the families really did not want to accept the guilty plea from him and wanted the death penalty. But yes, so this was exactly the same in 2001, 2002. Like, these families were very conflicted, and you had so many victims. And like we talked about at first, there were the 3 that you could tie, and then by DNA they could tie him to 4. So basically he is very much tied to 4 of the women's death right away, as far as legal pendings on the murder charges. And again, the lead in the department of the prosecution is a Norm Malling, and he is talking about no pleas, death penalty. And a lot of the families, on top of, some wanting the death penalty, others just absolutely dreaded a trial period. So there was also this situation. So you have a lot going on. You have a very conflicted situation with how these families are feeling and what they're wanting. Ridgway, during his first arrest, like, he does have his brothers come to visit him. Evidently Judith comes to visit. He is segregated from when he's in jail. He is put in to keep him safe. He is very much in a private cell and has to be kept there. His safety, they're watching him and everything. They're, trying to keep him safe for trial. During the investigation phase, early on, they are able to find the paint flecks that match the Kenworth paint flecks. And these flecks were found on Cynthia Hines, Wendy Cofield, and Debbie Estes. So they are added to the list. So there is a total, and Deborah Bonner's added in as well. So now the total, it started with 3 of the women. You added Carol Christensen, and now you do have Cynthia, Wendy, Debbie Estes, and then Deborah Bonner. So you do have 7 total women that they can, evidence-wise, tie to Gary. Now, they do have a judge assigned to the case. His name is Richard Jones. And kind of as, again, Gary's arrested late 01 and 02, there's just this continuous stalling by the defense. The defense is talking innocent. The prosecution is talking death penalty. And very quickly, you can see the turn. The defense is worried because at first they're just asking for all the evidence. So they're going through the evidence, and then it's pretty clear that they're seeing what's up against Gary, and they're like, okay. So by April of 2003, the defense is now talking to Gary's brother, Greg, whom he loves and admires and follows. And again, we discussed how by this time, Gary is no longer with Judith, like completely, that the divorce is finalized or whatever. But the defense is talking to Greg, and they are talking about a plea deal. So they're like, look, just telling it straight. Like, the evidence is legit, and the only way to save Gary from the death penalty would be if he can plead guilty and help the families. Like, that's going to be the only thing. And of course, this whole time, it's just been the prosecution knows. So at first, in April 2003, the defense comes to the prosecution and offers the plea deal, and they're, no, absolutely not. By June, though, they're still in communication, and the situation is there were still missing women. There were still unrecovered bodies. That weighed heavily on the prosecution as well. So, of course, the prosecution is talking to all the families involved. And the families, ultimately, they decide that the families deserve whatever information Ridgway can give them. So, in the end, the Norm Malling, he does pivot politically. That's a hard decision to make when you said that you would not, but he did, ultimately, especially even Dave Reichert felt he made the right decision allowing for the plea. But the plea, it will be based on a very full list of requirements, because Yeah. So first off, they have to, the defense has to confirm that Gary has the mental capacity to aid in finding bodies and reconstructing crimes and getting the right information. They had to know, the prosecution wanted to know that he would be able to offer up and assure physical evidence would be available, jewelry, clothing, anything that he had, photographs, like they wanted full disclosure from Ridgway, and he would have to promise to provide everything. And he is confessing at this time to 53 murders, locating about 10 to 14 sets of remains is what they discussed that he would be doing if they went with this plea. What they decided to do was they moved Gary out of the jail that he was in, and they moved him to a secret location where he could, be available to help whenever he was needed. One of the things was if he lied to them, they would have the right to pull the plug on the deal, and he would face the trial for the 7 counts that he is charged with. Now, they come to full agreement of these terms by June of 2003. So on the 13th of that month, he is taken out of the King County Jail, and then they hide him. So he does go through a series of evaluations by different mental health experts, but basically to keep him with the task force and to work with them, they actually move him to a secret setup at the King County International Airport. So he's actually moved into like a hangar situation. So he is there for 5.5 months, and basically he lives in an empty room with a mattress on the floor, and he just goes through a series of interviews, and they go on field trips to look for these bodies of these women. So at the beginning of this 5-month secret stint in the airport hangar, immediately it's frustrating for the prosecution because Gary, it's like he is unable to answer even the simplest of questions about any of this. He's kind of like, well, I don't know. And so they're trying to express to him like, hey, if you don't tell us the truth, this whole gig is done. Like, you will go to trial. So they do bring in a Dr. Robert Willer, who is a psychologist, and he is working with Ridgway to try to figure out, okay, is he lying because he subconsciously wants to be executed? Like, he deserves the death penalty? Is he lying to make himself kind of appear less of a monster so that, he's portrayed more positively, as far as press and future books or whatever that are written about him? Or is he lying to maintain control over the bodies of his victims, like these are his prized possessions? So it's Dr. Willer's trying to figure out, because he's clearly at first lying and not able to tell the truth. And what Dr. Willer points out is Gary seems to just completely not even know. It's like he is such a pathological liar, and he has lied to everyone for so long. He literally cannot stop. It's like he cannot stop. So he works with Ridgway, and he's like, look, like, you have to stop lying. You have to be honest. You have to tell everything. And so after some time, he actually starts to tell the truth, and he literally discusses the reason why he killed the women was very simply because he wanted to. Like, at first he blamed everything. He blamed money, female co-workers, his mom, his second wife Marcia. Like, it's like everybody else's problem. But finally he started to tell the truth and was like, you know what, I did it because I did it. I wanted to do it. It was all me. So he finally was take responsibility for his crimes. And again, he's blithering. I'll try to post. There are some good documentaries that actually have his interviews, and it's absolutely disgusting, but he is just such a crybaby. I will say something that we didn't discuss. Like, in his interviewing, of course, they are getting his childhood memories, talking about his childhood. And when he's around 15 years old, he does state that and they are able to back up the information, no charges were brought against him, but he stabs a young boy, like a 6-year-old boy in his neighborhood, like a neighborhood boy, for No reason, just because he wanted to. And another thing that Gary, people knew about him when he was younger is that he was cruel to animals. He would hurt cats in the neighborhood, different things. Like he was very much fitting in with certain aspects of serial killers, quote unquote. So that was one of the things, but that his propensity for violence was early and in his adolescence. Now, we talked about Marie Malvar. So one of the benefits of the plea agreement worked out for the Malvar family because Gary was able to lead them to Marie. And basically, he discussed how when he killed her, she had fought so hard. And of course, the Des Moines police had shown up and that dumped her body or hid her body. He actually was so upset that he hid her from himself because a lot of times he would go back to the bodies of his victims and, do things and such and move them or do, just whatever sexual things and moving them and just horrible things. But with her, he literally did not kind of remember where she was, but he was able to lead the detectives back to her. And so her family could actually properly bury her. Now, Gary, in the interviews, the police were trying to figure out, of course, they knew that Gary participated in necrophilia. They knew that, of course, he assaulted and murdered and, dumped the bodies and such. And so they had asked him if he had ever thought about mutilating the bodies, like cutting them up so that he could hide them better or whatever. And he came back and said, well, no, I have certain limits. Like his quote unquote internal limits in his mind was that basically he would screw them, quote unquote, kill them, bury them, and maybe have sex with them a few times afterwards. That was it. And evidently the practice of the necrophilia creeped him out. He said it scared him, that he would purposefully try to dump bodies kind of further away or hide them from himself, from his home or whatever, just so he wouldn't do that. So he was trying to kind of curb his appetite and give himself, quote unquote, these limits. Of course, this is, insane to us that can't even fathom that. But that was his mentality. And then he also discussed, because this task force was like, okay, how does this man with a very low-ish IQ, very little education, how did he do this for so long, evade, the police and such? And he himself told him that he went after the most weak, the vulnerable women. He would, even when his child was a baby infant, he would ride around with the baby, let the women, coo over the baby and just, take advantage of that. And he would purposefully come off very wimpy and meek. And so he could trick them. So he was, although he may not have been, quote unquote, intelligent, he was very conniving and very intelligent when it came to killing these women and evading the police. Like he knew what not to do. So the investigators did question Gary as far as how he would get, women in and out of his home, considering he stated he killed, 20 to 30 inside the home. And he stated that he would literally back his truck in like backwards to kind of shield himself or anything, once he actually used his son's trunk to carry a body out. So he would do anything and everything to keep neighbors or anyone else from seeing the horrible things that he was doing. Now, we talked about how Gary did help the investigators find Marie Malvar. So by August, Gary also assisted in finding the body of Pammy Avent. She had been missing, ever since the early 80s. Right after that, April Buttram was found off Interstate 90. So fortunately, the interviews with Gary would produce bodies and some information to the families and closure for some of the families for sure. Backside of that, unfortunately, the interviews did not and the searches did not produce any type of souvenir. In fact, he stated to Dave Reichert that he was 100% sure that no one would ever find jewelry, clothing, identities, anything like that associated with the women. He he did state that. And what he meant by that, who knows what he did with them, but it doesn't sound, he was very confident that they wouldn't find it. So on November 5th of 2003 is the first hearing where Gary officially enters his plea of guilty. 6 weeks later, they actually set up and welcomed the families to speak before they imposed the life sentence on Gary. Now, the families would get about 1/2 hour per family. And some of the families, of course, used the full thing, and some didn't even want that time. But the families were large. They would bring in parents, grandparents, sisters, brothers. Some needed more time. Some had questions and such. Fortunately, all the families were pretty flexible, and they managed to get, all the time in. And again, some families were not happy. Some families were incredibly livid, incredibly mad, as you can imagine, and just, they were mad at everybody, the prosecution, investigators, just everybody. Rightfully so. There was just a myriad of just a huge amount of emotion. Now, the actual charges against Gary came out to be 48. Originally, if they were going to trial, it would be 7, but there would be 48 women that would be, and their families and such, that would be processed with Gary's plea and with his charges. And we will discuss each of these victims. After the families came forward, Ridgway himself stood up. He had the opportunity to make his own statement. And he stated, "I'm sorry for killing all those young ladies. I have tried to remember as much as I could to help the detectives find and recover the ladies. I'm sorry for the scare I put into the community. I know the horrible things my acts were. I have tried for a long time to get these things out of my mind. I've tried for a long time to keep from killing any ladies. I'm sorry that I put my wife, my son, my brothers, and my family through this hell. I hope that they can find a way to forgive me. I'm very sorry for the ladies that were not found. May they rest in peace. They need a better place than where I gave them." Now, the judge himself had his own moment when he discussed, Gary and his quote-unquote Teflon-coated emotions and complete absence of compassion. So he ordered Ridgway to turn around and look at all the people in the hearing room. And when he did that, Judge Jones said, "As you spend the balance of your life in a cell in prison, I hope the last thought you have of your time in the free world is of their faces. If you have one bit of emotion, you will be haunted for the rest of your life." Now, Gary pleads guilty to 48 cases at that time at the end of 2003, and he is given a life sentence without the possibility of parole. He also agrees to plead guilty to any further cases that come about that can be connected to him in King County, because over the years, he initially said that he killed 60 women, then it was 70, at times he said 80. So there was really not a definitive number. Nobody would ever know the final count. Now, once Gary is convicted, he is placed in solitary confinement at the Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla, and this is from the beginning of January 2004. Now, over the years, there have been some transfers of Jerry. It appears in 2015, he was transferred over to Colorado. Also, even as recent as 24, that he was transferred out, and he was briefly transferred out to the King County Jail for a few days. And the explanation given later revealed that Ridgway was transferred to help locate more victims. Now, these 48, and there would be another name added to the list, but we're going to discuss these women. Of course, there are so many young souls that Gary ruined their life, ended their life, ruined their family's life. He was absolutely a monster. But Wendy Lee Cofield, Giselle Lavorne, Deborah Bonner, Marcia Chapman, Cynthia Hines, Opal Mills, Terry Milligan, Mary Meehan, Deborah Estes, Linda Rule, Denise Bush, Shonda Summers, Shirley Sherrill, Lori Respotnik, Rebecca Becky Marrero, Colleen Brockman, Sandra Major, Wendy Stevens, Alma Smith, Dolores Williams, Gail Matthews, Andrea Childers, Sandra Gabbert, Kimmy K. Pitzer, Mary Jane Malvar, Carol Christensen, Martina Otherly, Cheryl Wims, Yvonne Antosh, Carrie Roas, Constance Naon, Tammy Lyles, Kelly Ware, Tina Thompson, April Buttram, Debbie Abernathy, Tracy Winston, Maureen Feeney, Mary Bello, Tammy Avent, Delise Plager, Kimberly Nelson, Lisa Yates, Mary West, Cindy Smith, Patricia Barzak, Roberta Hayes, Marta Reeves, and Patricia Yellowrobe. Now, before Ridgway confessed, the Green River killer victims, they didn't even know about Rule, Barzak, Hayes, Reeves, Yellowrobe. And then there is another unidentified body still to this day, like no identity. Now, as of 2010, there were hikers that were hiking in Auburn, Washington, that found a skull in the same vicinity where Marie Malvar's remains were found in '03. The skull was identified as belonging to Marrero, who was last seen in 1982. Now, she became the 49th added to the original list of 48 from 2003. Now, the remains of Winston were found, but without her skull. This happened in '86, but then her skull was eventually found in 2005. Now, Major was never identified until 2012, so she had been a Jane Doe to that time. But then DNA testing confirmed her identity. Now, in 23, a previous Jane Doe, Anne Rospotnik, she was identified literally in 23. Now, still some possible victims that the task force felt like could have been victims was Amina Ajishif, the Casey Ann Lee, a Kelly K. McGinnis, Angela Gardner, and Tricia Osborne. Gary's family, of course, his mother and father, in fact, his dad died in 1998. His mother passed in August of 2001. So they never knew or lived through the confirmation of him being the Green River Killer. Now, obviously, they were alive whenever he was going through, the cops searching his home and all that. Well, and of course, he was with Judith. Well, he just lied to his whole family. And when nothing ever came about those searches, his family just assumed his innocence. In fact, his family assumed his innocence because he continued to lie even after his arrest in 2001. He lied to them until he actually confessed in 2003. And this was after his family was finding out about all of the actual evidence that was built against him. He continually lied to his family. His family has come forward. Judith has come forward. Greg, his sister-in-law's nieces. Even in 2014, his nieces did like a documentary where they were trying to locate and help locate Kelly McGinnis, because she's never been discovered, and he did plead guilty. Like he mentioned that he killed her, and he mentioned where he dumped her body, but her body has still not been recovered. So this is really an ongoing case to this day. There were allegations that have come about state that Gary is in bad health, which Dave Reichert has been interviewed, and he has stated that Gary Ridgway has been in bad health since like 2019, that he's not been in good health. He stated that there was some rumors going around that Gary is on hospice, but those were not true. So there's nothing definitive to say that Gary Ridgway is near the end of his life, although he has not been in good health for many, many years. He was born in 1949, so he is aged. He is considered the most quote-unquote prolific serial killer in United States history to this day. He again was convicted of the 49 murders with really a suspect toll. Like, we don't know. Is it 70? Is it 80? What is it? We do not know. Although he did help to locate some bodies, not everyone was located. So still to this day, there are search efforts. Obviously, his family had tried to help victims' families by talking to him, but he's a serial killer. He's a pathological liar. He has, killed and harmed these families, and there's just, he has not had any type of remorse. When he was arrested and afterwards, his son, Matthew, did come forward and at that time, and he has not spoken much sense, and he was not a part of any type of documentary or anything, but he commented on what a good father he had, how his dad was always there for him doing these things. And then on the flip side, Gary, whenever he was confessing and in his confessions, he literally said sometimes Matthew would be with him when he's dumping a body, and if perhaps Matthew had come upon the situation, that he would harm Matthew as well. He would harm his own child just to hide what he's been doing. The man is pure evil. This case was a very difficult case to go through and just absolutely heinous. And Gary Ridgway is just pure evil. So thank you guys so much for listening. Please drop a comment. Please follow. Please go find me on all the social medias and leave me a comment about any future content that you wish to see. Thank you guys, and we'll be back next week. We are going to be talking about the Mothman, and we're talking about the Mothman of Point Pleasant, West Virginia. We're going to the origins. So different spin next week, okay? Well, have a great week. Bye.